Chapter 14. Switched Escape. 2 thunder blasts shook the room. The doctor tried to duck under the table, but couldn't because the handcuffs were attached to the chair. Father Waterman cowered behind the doctor, making himself as small as possible. After a moment, the doctor opened an eye to see the green cops lying on the floor, motionless. D.S. Redmond stood with a gun in her hand. She looked at the doctor as she holstered her gun. "Your file also said," Redmond continued, "that you beat the Krynoids once." "I did," the doctor replied. "Now get me out of here so I can do it again." Redmond took out the keys to the cuffs from her pocket. Waterman was still hiding behind the doctor's chair. "Move it," Redmond ordered. Waterman stood and scrambled out of her way. Once the cuffs were off, the doctor stood and rubbed his wrists. "Come with us," the doctor said to Redmond. "I'll have to," Redmond replied. "They'll kill me if I stay." "Well, if that's everything," Waterman began, inching toward the door. "You're coming with us," the doctor ordered. "If I'm right, you're the key to this whole leafy problem." "That's a mixed metaphor," Waterman replied snidely. "You know that, right?" They heard movement in the hallway. "We have to go," Redmond said. "Right, Father Waterman," she continued acidly. "You follow me, the doctor in the rear. Let's move." She headed for the door. "She doesn't half take charge, eh?" Waterman whispered to the doctor. "She's no fool, unlike some I could name," the doctor replied, giving Waterman a push. They exited quickly. The people in the hallway looked shocked, but didn't attempt to stop them. The doctor decided they had been waiting for someone to go up against the Krynoids, but they had been too scared to make the first move. Redmond led them through several hallways until they exited into the car park, where she led them to a black SUV. "Put him in the back," she said to the doctor, referring to Waterman. "In," the doctor ordered. Waterman got in back, the doctor in front, with Redmond driving. She locked the door and looked at Waterman in the mirror. "You get out when I tell you to, understand?" she said. Waterman nodded glumly. Redmond started the vehicle and pulled away. "What about Andy Kent?" the doctor asked. "He'll be safe now," Redmond replied. "The Green Police don't know that he and I—" Her sentence trailed off. "Where are we going?" Waterman asked. "Somewhere safe," Redmond replied. "I've had it ready for some time." "And how long will we last? Do you have food and facilities for 3? Books? Sudoku?" the doctor asked. Redmond looked worried. "We could hide for 2 weeks, 3 if we ration." "And then what?" the doctor asked. "We might as well hire a narrowboat and enjoy the canals while we wait to be picked up." "Do you have a better plan?" Redmond asked. "Yeah," Waterman interjected. "Leave." "Is he right in the head?" Redmond asked the doctor. "He means leave the planet," the doctor replied. "What, just leave?" Redmond replied angrily. "Don't waste your energy on him," the doctor advised. "He's always been like this." "Wait a minute," Redmond said after a pause. "If you could leave," she asked Waterman, "why haven't you done so already?" Waterman looked sheepishly at Redmond. "He can't," the doctor replied. "He's referring to my craft." "You do have one?" Waterman asked sharply. "Of course, but we're not leaving Earth like this." "Too right we're not," Redmond added. "The problem is," the doctor admitted, "no planet with this level of Krynoid infestation has ever beaten them back." Redmond kept her eyes on the road, but her face moved between frustration and despair. "But there is one thing," the doctor added reluctantly. "Well, don't keep us in suspense," Redmond said. "Turn right," the doctor ordered. Redmond did so. "Go on," she ordered brusquely. "This invasion happened far too quickly. It should have taken decades, not days." "Which helps us how?" Redmond asked. The doctor turned to Waterman, who was looking innocently out the windows. "You're being very quiet," the doctor said pointedly. "You think you know everything," Waterman said, still looking out the window. "That's always been your problem." "What are you two talking about?" Redmond asked. "The only way the Krynoids could have succeeded so quickly is with the help of an alien with a time machine," the doctor said slowly, his eyes fixed on Waterman. "Time machine?" Redmond replied incredulously. "I read you had something called a TARDIS, whatever that is." "If you had read the whole file," the doctor said, looking at Redmond, You would know that a TARDIS travels through time. The doctor turned back to Waterman. And we each have one, don't we? We did, Waterman replied. What does that mean? The doctor asked. Get me to your TARDIS and we'll talk, Waterman said, crossing his arms. The doctor looked at Redman, who looked back at him. The doctor nodded. Redman pursed her lips and continued to drive. Not too fast, not too slow. Then it happened again. Another surge of energy struck the doctor. Doctor! He heard someone shout from far away as the darkness took him. Chapter 15. The Krynoid Itself. Sarah Jane reached the end of her route through the sewers. The smell was getting worse, and the holographic map indicated that she would have to climb up the nearest ladder and out the top. But a manhole cover blocked her exit. She climbed up and pushed against it as hard as she could, but it barely moved. She changed the setting on the sonic lipstick to anti-magnetic and aimed it at the cover. Slowly it began to tremble, then rise. Sarah Jane gave it another push, but it didn't move far enough. She tried again, keeping her arms stiff as she pushed with her legs, and finally it bounced away. She turned off her sonic screwdriver and put it away. She squinted in the light, waiting a moment before climbing into the street. Then she was up and out. She breathed the fresh air in deeply and looked about her. No one was about. The catchphrase, "It was quiet, too quiet," ran through her head. But even if this was a trap, she had to get to the TARDIS. The bridge where the Green Police had thrown that man to his death was about 100 meters ahead. She forced herself to walk casually toward the pavement and the path to the TARDIS. As she did, a black SUV drove past her at high speed. It slammed on the brakes near the bridge and skidded to a halt. Sarah Jane saw a woman get out and shout at somebody in the back. Another man got out, a priest, and they converged on the front passenger door. They appeared to be helping someone out, someone who could barely move. It was the doctor. Sarah Jane ran toward them. "Doctor!" she cried. The woman turned toward and yelled something, but Sarah Jane couldn't hear what. The doctor slowly looked up and saw Sarah running toward him. The doctor's eyes widened in fear, and he held his hands out in front of him. "Don't!" he cried. Sarah Jane skidded to a halt. The woman was saying something about being arrested, but the priest, who was helping the doctor stay on his feet, was looking intently between the doctor and Sarah Jane. "D.S. Redman," the doctor said, gasping for breath. "This is Sarah Jane Smith, a friend of mine." He turned to Sarah Jane and showed her his hands. Blue energy crackled between his fingers. Redman saw it and stepped back. "What's happened?" Sarah Jane asked. "No time to explain," the doctor said. He appeared tired, worn out, and in pain. "He's right," said the priest to Redman. "Let's get to the TARDIS before we do anything else." Sarah Jane realized that the priest was touching the doctor's arm, but he wasn't being shocked. Whatever that energy was, it wasn't electricity. Then she realized that the priest was staring at her. "Who's this?" Sarah Jane asked the doctor, nodding at the priest. "Father Waterman, also known as the Time Meddler," the doctor said. "Would you stop calling me that?" Waterman said, sulking like a schoolboy. Redman was about to say something when they heard a loud thump behind them. It shook the whole street, nearly causing them to lose their balance. "It's here," Redman said quietly. She seemed to shrink inwardly as a look of dread clouded her face. "What?" Sarah Jane asked. "The Krynoid of London," Waterman replied. It was over 30 feet tall and could be seen moving toward the intersection of their street. Thankfully, it wasn't crushing any houses to get to them, yet. Sarah Jane heard Waterman mutter something that priests aren't allowed to say. "So that's why the streets are so bloody empty," Redman added, almost spitting out the words. "It's after me, and the TARDIS," the doctor gasped, bracing himself against the SUV. "Through the trees," he said, pointing vaguely toward the greenery. "We have to go," Waterman said, throwing the doctor's left arm over his shoulders and dragging him toward the path. "Come on," he hollered back to Redman and Sarah Jane. "I don't know the way." The Krynoid stood in the road, observing them. Sarah Jane and Redman appeared frozen as they stared back at it. They could feel it tugging at their minds, looking for something it could use. Suddenly, all the plants in the area began flailing. "I can't get through," Waterman cried. Redman and Sarah Jane turned. Waterman was holding the doctor, who was almost out on his feet near the entrance to the path, but the greenery was going wild. Sarah Jane ran toward the path and fired her sonic lipstick. A corridor roughly 10 feet in diameter opened up. The plants were pulling away, or outright wilting from the microwaves. Sarah Jane turned back to Redman. "Come on!" she cried. Redman looked at Sarah Jane and back at the Krynoid, which was approaching quickly. "Maybe you were right, Andy," she muttered, before jumping back into her SUV. "Wait!" Sarah Jane cried desperately. "We have to go!" Waterman cried. Waterman and the doctor moved onto the path, but Sarah Jane remained frozen in place as she watched Redman back up about 10 meters and then accelerate toward the Krynoid. There was a terrible crash, but the Krynoid stopped in its tracks. "Hurry up!" Waterman cried to Sarah Jane, "or we're all dead!" She turned to the path and forced herself to move forward with Waterman and the doctor. She couldn't see what happened to Redman, but she could hear the vehicle being crushed. Somehow, they made it to the TARDIS. "Stay back from him," Waterman said to Sarah Jane, as the doctor fiddled with his key. She did so. Finally, the door opened, and all three got inside, Sarah Jane last. She slammed the door with a sigh of relief. Waterman helped the doctor to the controls. "Blimey, you've changed the desktop," Waterman said. The doctor didn't reply. He reached for the controls but slumped forward onto the control panel instead. "You're in a right state," Waterman muttered as he helped the doctor into a chair. He began working the controls himself, and soon the TARDIS had left the Krynoid-infested Earth. The doctor sat quietly, breathing deeply. Sarah Jane pocketed her sonic lipstick and walked toward the doctor, keeping at least 2 meters between them. "Now, doctor, will you kindly tell me what's going on?" she asked sternly. "Yeah," Waterman said, turning to the doctor. "I want to hear too. In fact," he continued, crossing his arms, "I think I'm going to enjoy this." The doctor gave Waterman a look that would have stripped paint from a wall, but Waterman's smirk never wavered. As the doctor turned to Sarah Jane, his face softened. "There was a problem," he began.